Sometimes power isn't about throwing the hardest punch, but knowing when not to throw one at all. Tonight, we bring you an unbelievable story about Keanu Reeves, a luxury hotel, and an arrogant manager who made the biggest mistake of his life. What happens when Hollywood's most humble superstar gets disrespected in public? What does he do when he's punched in the face for no reason? Stay with us until the end, because what Keanu does next will leave you speechless. Let's get into it. The Grand Sterling Hotel wasn't just a luxury destination. It was the luxury destination. A sanctuary for the world's wealthiest, where status was everything and exclusivity reigned supreme. Here, behind its velvet ropes and gilded doors, billionaires sealed business deals over rare vintages. Celebrities lounged in private suites that cost more per night than most earned in a year, and royalty dined on meals prepared by Michelin-starred chefs. Every corner of the hotel was a statement of wealth. The marble floors, polished to perfection, gleamed under the glow of breathtaking chandeliers. The air carried a subtle blend of expensive cologne, fresh-cut roses, and aged whiskey, mingling with the delicate sound of a live jazz quartet. Servers in crisp uniforms glided effortlessly between guests, balancing silver trays of imported delicacies and cocktails worth a small fortune. The Grand Sterling wasn't just about luxury. It was about power. It was a place where money didn't just open doors. It built them. And those who didn't belong, they weren't just ignored, they were erased. And no one enforced that unspoken rule better than Richard Alden, the hotel's general manager. For years, Richard had cultivated a reputation for flawless discretion and impeccable judgment. He prided himself on his ability to read people in an instant. A glance at their watch, their suit, their demeanor, that was all he needed to determine if someone deserved to be here or if they were wasting his time. So when a lone man stepped through the towering glass doors that night, Richard barely needed a second look. His instincts told him everything: the slightly creased blazer, the lack of a Rolex, the absence of an entourage. This wasn't a guest. This was an outsider. And in the Grand Sterling, outsiders didn't last long. What Richard didn't know, however, was that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, because the man he had just dismissed was Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves wasn't like the other guests. No entourage trailing behind him, no bodyguards clearing a path, no expensive designer suit announcing his worth. Just a simple black blazer, slightly creased from travel, a dark shirt underneath, a quiet presence that carried more weight than any luxury brand ever could. His hair, a little unkempt, fell just above his shoulders, effortless, natural. He didn't strut like a man desperate for attention. He didn't pause for cameras or adjust his posture for the perfect shot. He simply walked, calm, measured, unbothered. As he stepped into the Grand Sterling's magnificent lobby, he took a moment to absorb the grandeur, the towering chandeliers, the pristine marble floors, the soft hum of conversation between the ultra-wealthy. It was a world built for power, where fortunes were flaunted and the price of a single night's stay could buy a small house. A few guests glanced in his direction. Some paused, squinting slightly, their minds racing to place the familiar face. They knew him. They just didn't know they knew him, but the staff, they didn't see an A-lister. They saw nothing special. Another man in an ordinary suit, another face that didn't scream money, and no one noticed faster than Richard Alden, the Grand Sterling's general manager, prided himself on being able to spot a nobody from a mile away. And to him, Keanu looked like just that. Richard Alden prided himself on his ability to spot nobodies. The moment he saw Keanu, his brows furrowed in mild disdain. The creased suit, the lack of a Rolex, the absence of a security team. To Richard, this wasn't a guest. This was an intruder. And in his hotel, intruders didn't belong. Richard stepped forward, smoothly cutting Keanu off before he could approach the concierge desk. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor, his navy blue suit impeccably tailored. He gave Keanu the kind of smile meant for people who didn't belong. "Sir, I believe you may be lost." His tone was polite, but firm. Keanu looked at him, his expression unreadable. "No, I don't think so." Richard's smirk deepened. He had seen this act before, wannabe VIPs, freeloaders trying to sneak their way in. He had no time for it. "I'm afraid this hotel is exclusive to our esteemed guests. I can have security escort you out if needed." Keanu sighed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was disappointment. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small black key card. Before he could even present it, Richard grabbed his wrist. The move was fast, aggressive. Richard's grip tightened around Keanu's wrist, his knuckles going white. His voice was low, sharp. "I told you." And then, without warning, he swung. Thwack! The punch landed clean. Too clean, a solid fist colliding with Keanu's jaw. The force snapped his head slightly to the side, a faint shudder running through his body. Then, silence. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. A woman in a red dress gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A businessman clutching a whiskey glass nearly dropped it. The jazz band, mid-song, stopped playing, all eyes locked on the scene. Keanu took a slow, measured breath. His fingers lifted, brushing against his jaw, feeling the dull ache of impact. Slight, metallic taste filled his mouth. Blood. But he didn't react. He didn't shove Richard back. He didn't yell. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he smiled. It wasn't an arrogant smirk. It wasn't an amused grin. It was calm, controlled, and that terrified Richard, because suddenly he felt it. A shift in the air, a weight settling over the room, pressing down like an invisible force. Keanu's composure was unnatural, not like a man who just got punched, not like a man who was about to lose. Richard swallowed hard. His confidence wavered. The entire lobby had gone still. The jazz band had stopped playing. The distant murmur of conversation had died down. Even the soft clinking of champagne glasses had vanished. It was like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting, and then Keanu moved. Slow, effortless. His hand reached into his pocket once more. For a split second, Richard flinched, expecting retaliation. A shove. A punch. Something. But instead, Keanu pulled out a single, sleek black key card. He placed it down on the concierge desk. Click. The sound was barely audible, but in the silence of the room, it felt thunderous. And then, the golden letters on the A card gleamed under the chandelier's soft glow. Grand Sterling Executive Owner, a hushed gasp rippled through the crowd. A woman in heels took a shaky step backward. A bellboy's tray nearly slipped from his hands. A businessman holding a glass of whiskey froze mid-sip. And Richard? Richard felt his stomach drop. Because everyone in the room knew what that card meant. It wasn't a VIP pass. It wasn't a penthouse key. It was an ownership card. Keanu Reeves didn't just have a reservation. He owned the hotel. The realization hit Richard like a freight train. His mouth went dry. His heart pounded in his chest. He had assaulted the owner, the man who could have. Him fired, sued, ruined. Bead of sweat formed at his temple. He opened his mouth, tried to speak, but no words came out. And Keanu? He just stood there, silent, watching, not angry, not smug, just waiting. Because now, Richard Alden was the one with something to prove. Richard's face went pale. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. The weight of his mistake settled over him like a crushing force. He had just punched his own boss, the owner of the Grand Sterling Hotel. The realization clawed at his throat. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. But no words came out. His lips parted, ready to apologize, to beg, to plead. But Keanu? Keanu was already walking away, unbothered, unshaken, like Richard wasn't even worth his time. The room watched in silence as Keanu strode toward the elevator. Guests, staff, they all moved aside, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of respect. The golden elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Keanu stepped inside, calm, effortless, and then, just before the doors fully shut, he turned, just slightly. One last look, not a glare, not a smirk, just a look, one that said everything. And Richard Alden? He felt it deep in his bones. Ding. The doors closed. And Richard, his career? It was over. Violence doesn't make you powerful. Respect does. Keanu Reeves didn't just win the fight, he won without even throwing a punch. If you loved this story, like and subscribe for more shocking moments that prove humility always wins.